The summer heat hadn't broken in days, and the parched lawns in the neighborhood seemed to wilt under the relentless sun. But Alex's backyard remained green, nourished by the cool, clear water from the well that had been drilled decades before the first row of identical suburban homes ever appeared. It wasn't flashy, but it was efficient, something that always irked the HOA, while others were shackled to rising water bills and tiered usage limits. Alex watered his garden freely, ran his sprinklers longer, and even kept a small koi pond. To the HOA, that made him a problem. When Alex first moved in 10 years ago, the HOA had only just begun to assert more aggressive control. At the time, they were focused on cosmetic issues, mailbox styles, lawn heights, even the color temperature of porch light bulbs. It was petty, but manageable. However, everything shifted 2 years ago, when a new board was elected, led by a man named Greg Monroe. Greg came in like a sheriff from an old western, determined to clean up the community and modernize standards. To Greg, Alex's well represented everything backward and out of line. It started with the letters, formal notices with heavy legal jargon, citing violations of community ordinances. Then came the fines, first $50, then $200, each time. Alex responded with scanned copies of his original deed and permits, proving that the well was both legal and protected under grandfather clauses. He even met with city officials who confirmed that his private well was not in violation of any municipal code. But the HOA wasn't interested in facts, they were chasing conformity. Neighbors began to talk, some whispered support, others avoided. Alex entirely afraid of getting on Greg's bad side. The HOA meetings became colder, more hostile. Alex stopped attending after being shouted down for presenting city-signed documentation. He could feel the shift. The HOA wasn't just annoyed anymore. They were angry. They couldn't control him the way they controlled the others, and that made him a target. One afternoon, while Alex was adjusting a valve on his irrigation system, a landscaping contractor stopped near the edge of his yard and waved. "Hey, you know, they tried to get us to dig here last week," the man said, nodding toward the well. Said it was HOA approved, but something didn't feel right. We passed. That night, Alex barely slept. He reviewed his security footage, checked the locks on his gates, and even printed new copies of his well permits to keep on hand. Creeping anxiety took root in him, not of confrontation, but of sabotage. He knew the HOA couldn't touch his well legally, but Greg didn't strike him as someone who respected legal lines. Still, nothing happened for weeks. The heat got worse, and Alex's green lawn made his home stick out like a rebellious teenager in a class of conformists. Then came the day that would unravel everything. Alex had taken a rare trip out of town, just a weekend getaway to visit family. When he returned late Sunday evening, something felt wrong. There was a strange smell in the air, chemical, dusty, as he rounded the corner. Of his backyard, the world seemed to fall out from beneath him. His well cap was missing. In its place was a dome of hardened concrete, roughly spread, still stained with streaks of gray down the side. At its base were remnants of splattered mix and dried footprints. At first he just stared. It didn't make sense. There had been no notice, no warning, no permission. Then came the rage. He grabbed his phone and snapped dozens of photos from every angle. He dug through the mailbox and found nothing. He rushed to his security system and reviewed the footage. Sure enough, just a day prior, a cement truck had backed into the alley behind his property. 2 workers, under direction from someone in a polo shirt and clipboard, pumped concrete directly into his well. The man giving orders? Greg Monroe. Alex's heart pounded as he watched the timestamp roll. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't negligence. This was a planned, deliberate act. The HOA had decided that if they couldn't legally force him to shut down the well, they would destroy it. No court, no warning, no mediation. It's just a smug man with power and a truck full of cement. The next morning, Alex contacted the HOA office. A woman named Barbara answered with her usual plastic tone, but when Alex demanded answers, her Facade cracked. Greg filed an emergency landscaping modification, she stammered. There was concern that your well presented a safety issue. Liability, you understand. Alex didn't understand. In fact, he didn't believe a word. He hung up, walked out into the yard, and stood before the scar in his property where clean water once flowed. Vow not just to fight back, but to make sure they'd regret ever treating him like a problem to be erased. The war had started, and Alex wasn't interested in backing down. Asterisk, the concrete had hardened by the time Alex finished reviewing the footage. What was once a functioning, reliable well, something that had served his property for years, was now sealed off like a tomb. The rounded lump of gray in his backyard looked like a silent insult, a final act of power from the HOA that dared him to respond. But Alex wasn't just angry, he was focused, beneath the fury burning in his chest. Something colder and far more dangerous was forming. Resolve. He began by documenting everything. He took high-resolution photographs of the concrete from every angle. He photographed the footprints, the tire tracks leading into the alley, the broken grass along the path the truck had taken. He printed out screenshots from the security footage, time-stamped and clear. Greg's face was visible in several frames, clipboard in hand, directing the workers. That alone was gold. But Alex didn't stop there. He knocked on his neighbor Mia's door, the one with the best view of the alley. Mia hesitated at first. "You know I don't want trouble, Alex," she said, arms folded tightly. "Greg already threatened to fine me for not trimming my hedges. Last month? I'm not asking you to testify in court. Just tell me if you saw anything," he said calmly. "Anything at all?" Her expression softened. "Yeah, I saw the cement truck. It was around 10 a.m. Saturday. 2 guys in orange vests, and Greg was there. I thought you'd approved it." Alex nodded. "Thanks, Mia. That helps." He returned home and typed up a detailed summary, combining eyewitness testimony, footage stills, and city-approved documentation proving his well's legality. Then he made 2 calls, one to his attorney and one to a contact he hadn't spoken. 2 in over a year, a former colleague from the city's building inspection office. His name was Ray, and he owed Alex a favor. Ray agreed to meet for coffee the next morning. Sitting across from Alex in a corner booth of a rundown diner, he raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the packet Alex had assembled. "This is wild," Ray said, lowering the folder. "They poured concrete into a live, permitted well." Alex nodded. "No notice. It's no legal right. Just walked in and destroyed it." "Man, that's destruction of private infrastructure. Possibly even a criminal trespass, depending on the permit date." Alex leaned forward. "Can you confirm the city still recognizes that well?" Ray smirked. "Already did. Still registered under your property as a supplemental source. It was grandfathered in before the HOA was ever chartered. Now they don't have the authority to touch it." "That's what I thought." Alex felt a glimmer of satisfaction, but satisfaction wasn't enough. He needed consequences. So, his lawyer drafted a demand letter. It wasn't dramatic or threatening. It was clinical and precise. The letter cited specific municipal codes, property rights, and statutes outlining unlawful destruction of personal property. It demanded full restitution, repair of the well, compensation for damages, and a formal apology. It was hand-delivered to the HOA office 3 days after the concrete incident. The response came in the form of a smug, dismissive email from Greg Monroe himself. "Mr. Foster," it read, "the HOA acted within its rights to preserve the safety and visual cohesion of our community. Your unauthorized well posed a risk to residents and was deemed non-compliant with current landscaping standards. Consider the matter closed." Closed. That one word lit a new fire inside Alex. It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. Greg believed the HOA was untouchable. He believed he could bury a problem in cement and walk away without consequence. But Alex wasn't going to let him walk away. He filed a police report. It wasn't a quick solution, but it forced the local department to open a case and begin preliminary investigation. That alone was enough to shake the HOA's image of invincibility. Neighbors began asking questions. Whispers turned to murmurs. What else had the HOA done without permission? Who had given them unchecked authority? One morning, while Alex was raking along the edge of the concrete dome, a woman from 3 houses down approached cautiously. "Is it true they destroyed your well without telling you?" "Yes," Alex replied flatly. "And they're about to find out what happens when they mess with the wrong homeowner." Her eyes widened. "You're actually doing something about it?" "I'm not just doing something," he said, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm going to make sure they never pull a stunt like this again." That night, Alex sat down with his notes, his evidence, and a city ordinance booklet spread across the table. If the HOA thought pouring concrete was a show of power, they were about to see what real pressure looked like. He had contacts. He had leverage. Most importantly, he had time. The well might have been filled, but the fight was just beginning. Alex's living room had become a command center. Blueprints, printed emails, legal codes, and municipal contracts were spread out over every available surface. He paced between piles of paper and a whiteboard now cluttered with dates, HOA, quotes, and contact names. The HOA had filled his well with concrete, but it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about principle, about accountability, about making them pay attention to what they'd done and ensuring they couldn't simply erase it. After weeks of frustration, Alex's patience had transformed into strategic obsession. Every phone call, every city record he pulled, every conversation he had was a step forward. And as he peeled back the layers of the HOA's authority, he began to notice cracks forming in their foundation. His breakthrough came one quiet afternoon while reviewing the city's online utility contracts. It was tedious work, buried in layers of bureaucratic language. But then he spotted a contract between the HOA and the City Water Authority. The document was nearly 15 years old and hadn't been updated since the neighborhood's early expansion phase. It included provisions for emergency services, irrigation for community green spaces, and preferential rates for HOA-managed properties. What caught Alex's eye was a clause tucked deep in the fine print. Continued service was conditional upon infrastructure compliance and non-violation of individual homeowner utility rights. He read that line 3 times. The HOA's contract. With the city required them to respect private, homeowner utilities as a condition for maintaining their bulk rate water contract. Alex cross-checked his well registration still listed, still active, still valid under city records. The HOA's interference with it didn't just violate his rights. It breached the contract they had with the city. His hands trembled slightly with adrenaline. This wasn't just a moral win, this was leverage. He immediately called Ray, his contact in the city's building inspection office, asked if he could quietly confirm whether the city's water authority would act on a breach of this kind. Ray called him back the next morning. "They'll take it seriously," Ray said. "If you file a formal complaint and attach the documentation, they're obligated to investigate. The city's liability increases if they knowingly provide discounted water to an HOA that violated a utility rights clause." Alex sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then he smiled. "Then that's exactly what I'm going to do." The complaint process wasn't flashy. It involved filling out forms, attaching evidence, and writing a detailed account of events. But Alex was thorough, included everything: the destruction of the well, Greg's presence, the security footage, city verification of the well's legality. In the contract clause that directly tied the HOA's misconduct to a breach of agreement, within 3 business days he received confirmation that an internal audit would be initiated. Word spread fast after that. Residents noticed when city inspectors arrived at the HOA clubhouse, clipboards in hand, examining sprinkler systems and water meters. They asked to see the community irrigation logs, contractor lists, and water usage statements. The HOA board scrambled. Greg issued an email stating that it was a routine inspection, but no one bought it. The timing was too perfect. Of the most revealing moments came from a chance encounter in the grocery store parking lot, where Alex bumped into Sandra, a quiet resident who rarely spoke up at meetings. She pulled him aside near the cart return. "I heard you filed something with the city," she said quietly. "People are talking. A lot of us aren't happy with what they did to you." "I didn't just do it for me," Alex replied. "They've been abusing power for too long." Sandra nodded slowly. "Let me know if you ever need signatures. I think you'd be surprised how many people are ready to see them fall." The water freeze didn't happen overnight. But when it did, it was both subtle and devastating. The city suspended the HOA's access to bulk water services for contractual review, citing potential violations pending further investigation. That meant immediate restrictions on water usage across all HOA-controlled properties. The fountains, the clubhouse bathrooms, the decorative landscaping, even the pool. Greg called an emergency board meeting which quickly devolved into chaos. Residents were furious. They wanted answers. Greg tried to spin the narrative, blaming outdated paperwork and technical errors. But Alex was there too, sitting quietly in the back row. When someone asked why the city got involved in the first place, he stood up. "They broke the law," he said calmly. "They destroyed a private utility that was legally registered with the city. That triggered a clause in their water agreement. This didn't happen because of an error. It happened because they thought they could do whatever they wanted." There was silence, then whispers, then murmurs of agreement. Greg's eyes locked with Alex's, but this time there was no arrogance behind them. Only panic. The kind of panic that comes when a man who has always been in control realizes that control is slipping. Alex walked out of the meeting as the room erupted behind him. His well was still filled with concrete. But now, the HOA's world was starting to crack, and he was just getting started. The sound of sprinklers in the neighborhood had gone silent. The once lush medians that divided the clean suburban streets began to yellow and wilt. The fountains at the entrance to the community, once a proud symbol of luxury, were bone dry. At first, residents assumed it was a temporary maintenance issue until the HOA posted a notice on the community bulletin board and emailed everyone a vague update. Water services to common areas are temporarily paused due to city-level reviews. Please conserve water where possible. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. The inspection, the halted amenities, the silence from the board, of course the quiet but growing knowledge that one homeowner had filed a formal complaint. Alex had become an unwilling local celebrity, and it was clear that Greg and the rest of the HOA board were scrambling behind closed doors. But Alex wasn't done yet. The water freeze was only part of the plan, a consequence of their own decisions, yes, but also a lever. He knew that behind every HOA, especially one like this, lay a careful balance of money, convenience, and power. Interrupting water wasn't just an inconvenience, it disrupted operations. Clubhouse rentals had to be canceled, outdoor events were postponed, landscaping contracts were suspended. The HOA's carefully curated image of control began to fracture. Greg attempted damage control almost immediately. He hosted a town hall meeting at the community center, no refreshments, no running water, and worst of all, no functioning air conditioning due to the water-cooled systems being shut down. Dozens of residents showed up anyway, irritated and sweaty, demanding answers. Greg stood at the front of the room with a forced smile, clutching a clipboard like a lifeline. "We're working closely with city officials to resolve a minor technical issue with our water agreement. It's a temporary hiccup. Nothing serious, just some paperwork delays caused by recent updates to municipal policies." Alex rose from the back row. "That's a lie." Heads turned. Greg stiffened. Alex stepped forward, holding a printed version of the city's audit notice. "This isn't a technical issue. The city froze your contract because you violated their terms, specifically the clause that requires HOA compliance with private utility rights. You destroyed a legal, registered well on private property without cause or consent. That triggered a full-scale review." Greg looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Mr. Foster, you filled my well with concrete," Alex said calmly. "You lied about it. And now you're lying to them." The room buzzed with tension. Residents looked between Greg and Alex, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Someone near the front spoke up. "Wait, is that true? You destroyed his property?" Another voice followed. "Is that why we have no pool access? And my kid's birthday party got canceled?"
What?
Greg fumbled for words. "It was a safety measure. The well was non-compliant with current HOA regulations, but not with the city," Alex cut in. "The well was grandfathered in, documented, registered, and confirmed by the city's own department. I have all the paperwork. You acted illegally. That's why we're here." Chaos broke out. Residents began shouting over each other, some demanding resignations, others questioning how many other safety decisions the HOA had made without permission or due process. Greg tried to maintain order, but the room had turned on him. The carefully curated facade was gone, replaced with anger, confusion, and a growing distrust that threatened to unravel the board's entire foundation. Over the following days, pressure mounted. Angry emails flooded the HOA inbox. Petition began circulating to freeze the board's decision-making authority until a third-party oversight could be installed. One homeowner launched a private forum to discuss HOA misconduct. Another began an informal audit of community finances. What had started as retaliation against one homeowner had spiraled into a full-scale uprising. For Alex, it wasn't about popularity. He avoided the spotlight, quietly continuing his work behind the scenes. But what mattered most was happening. In the background, the city's investigation into the HOA's violation was moving swiftly. A hearing was scheduled, and Alex was invited to present testimony. Greg received a formal summons to respond to the complaint. And yet, despite everything, there was one thing Alex couldn't ignore: the concrete still sitting in his yard. A solid, mocking monument to what had been taken from him. It wasn't just about water. It was about being violated on his own property, being treated like an obstacle instead of a neighbor. One morning, he received a letter. Not from the city or his lawyer, but from the HOA itself. A folded, apologetic mess of corporate speak and forced humility. They offered to cover partial costs of restoring his yard. They avoided mentioning the word well. They requested mutual resolution. And they ended with a thinly veiled suggestion that continuing to push this matter could bring unnecessary disruption to the community. Alex smiled as he folded the letter and tossed it into the shredder. They weren't apologizing because they regretted it. They were apologizing because they'd lost control, because for the first time they were being held accountable. He wasn't finished. Not until the last piece of concrete was gone. Not until Greg Monroe knew what it meant to be on the receiving end of consequences. The war they had started was now theirs to endure. Alex was just getting started. The morning Greg Monroe resigned, the neighborhood felt different. The air wasn't lighter of anything. It carried the weight of something unfinished, but it was quieter. Word traveled fast, just like it had when the well was filled, just like it had when the water was shut off. But this time, the community wasn't whispering in fear or confusion. This time, it was relief, vindication. A shift in power that had seemed impossible just a few weeks before. Greg's resignation came. Not with grace, but with a bitter 3-sentence email citing personal reasons and emerging obligations outside the HOA. No one was fooled. His leadership had collapsed under public scrutiny, legal pressure, and a growing mutiny among homeowners tired of being treated like renters in their own homes. And while some on the board tried to distance themselves from his decisions, the damage was done. The HOA had cracked wide open. Alex didn't celebrate, not openly. He didn't gloat or hold court at the mailbox like some had hoped. He stayed busy, focused. Because while Greg had stepped down, the concrete still hadn't been removed. The well had not been restored. There had been no real apologies, just carefully worded attempts at image repair. That wasn't enough. His attorney had already filed civil claims. The case was moving through early mediation, and the city's investigation had now concluded. The HOA had violated municipal code, failed to comply with the terms of their water contract, and acted unlawfully in damaging a private water source. The result was a fine, a permanent warning on the HOA's record, and a clause adjustment in their water agreement that gave the city oversight. Authority in any future changes to individual utility services. The HOA's power had been legally and publicly reduced, but the symbolic restoration mattered to Alex just as much. After weeks of silence, he finally received an official offer from the newly reshuffled board. They proposed a full restoration of the well, including removal of the concrete, new casing, and a water quality inspection, to be paid in full by the HOA's insurance. They also offered to cover legal fees in the spirit of community healing. What caught Alex's eye, though, is the final line. We recognize that mistakes were made and that your rights as a homeowner were violated. We sincerely hope. This agreement marks a new chapter for our neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The concrete was broken apart with jackhammers and hauled away over the course of 3 long, satisfying days. Alex watched from his porch, arms crossed as the same kind of truck that had once brought destruction now took it away. The crew worked efficiently, careful not to damage the surrounding landscaping. When the final chunk was lifted out, revealing the sealed cap of the well casing below, Alex exhaled for what felt like the first Time and weeks, the new pump system was installed within a week. Modern, quiet, efficient. The water flowed again. The koi pond was revived. Irrigation lines filled with pressure and hummed with life. The garden, which had browned and wilted during the chaos, began to return to its vibrant self. But more than that, the restoration of the well felt like the restoration of something deeper, his agency, his dignity, his right to stand his ground. Neighbors stopped by more often now. Some brought coffee, others just came to talk. Few apologized for staying silent during the ordeal. We were scared, one of them admitted. We didn't know we could push back. You always could, Alex said simply. They just made you think you couldn't. The HOA board was restructured within a month. New president was elected, someone quieter, more diplomatic, and crucially, someone who had openly condemned Greg's actions. New bylaws were drafted and voted on, including a clause that prohibited the HOA from interfering with any pre-existing utilities or infrastructure without a court order. Transparency policies were added. Meeting attendance doubled. The neighborhood had changed. Alex was asked to run for the board. He declined. He had no desire to police mailboxes or fight over fence colors. What he wanted was exactly what every homeowner deserved: peace, fairness, and the freedom to enjoy their property without fear of overreach. What he had endured was extreme, but not unique. Across the country, HOAs held power over millions of homes, often unchecked, often cloaked in legal ambiguity. His story, though rooted in one well and one petty board, had become something greater, a symbol of resistance. A reminder that no contract, no rule, no office gives someone the right to steamroll over others. When the legal settlement cleared and the final documents were signed, Alex walked to the edge of his backyard and stared at the well cap, now clean and sealed. A small solar light glowed beside it in the evening dark. There would be no plaque, no monument, just water, flowing beneath the ground like it always had. Quiet, constant, untouchable again. The HOA had tried to bury him. Instead, they'd given him the tools to dig them out. And now, the well stood not just as a source of water, but as proof that even the most ordinary homeowner could stand tall when they refused to be silenced.